Well, hello everyone and welcome back to History Hack. Today we're in 19th century America and we're thinking about the Homestead Act of 1862. And we're actually going to do something we've not done before. We're going to play through a mission of Red Dead Redemption 2. It's the one with the catchy music as the main character builds his own home. Now, he's not used the Homestead Act for this, he's taken a loan from the bank, but whatever. What you're seeing here represents some of the work that would have been completed by settlers moving to the west as they tried to build a life on land that wasn't always conducive to it. Almost as soon as they'd kicked the British out, traitors, the US government wanted to encourage westward expansion, not least to stop the British in Canada potentially dropping south and claiming territory for themselves. Alongside the Pacific Railroad Act, the Homestead Act was a piece of legislation passed in the midst of the American Civil War that encouraged settlers to move to the west permanently. Initially, the US government had sold land in the west at $1 an acre, but this was far too expensive for ordinary families to buy. The Homestead Act allowed families to claim 160 acres of land for just a $10 registration fee, provided it was used to set up a family home and for farming. These 160-acre plots were known as homesteads, and buying a homestead was known as filing a claim. Now, surprise surprise, the government wanted to maximise how much they could eventually take back in tax from those who made the move, so, in order to do this, they put into place stipulations to prevent rich landowners from buying up the land for themselves and focused on ensuring as many individual family-owned farms were set up as possible. In order to achieve this, the government allowed anybody over 21 to file a claim, including ex-slaves and women, although they didn't extend this to Native Americans, and anyone who established a homestead had to work on the land themselves. If you'd lived on your homestead for 5 years and managed to plant 5 acres of crops, you were then able to buy your land outright for $30, and this was known as proving up. Now, on paper, I'll be honest, to me, this act and everything involved in it is incredibly boring, but in reality, the impact of this act is significant because it was relatively successful, but it also highlighted some of the problems the US government had in trying to control westward expansion themselves. By 1876, over 6 million acres of land had been claimed, and it directly encouraged immigration from Europe, where many realised they would never be able to own land in the manner available to them in the American West. However, the act wasn't perfect. Despite many homesteads being claimed, 60% of homesteads were never eventually proved up. In large part, this was a result of the difficulties of farming on the Great Plains generally, which were often hard, dusty and dry, with no easy access to water. Rich landowners also found a loophole in the system where they encouraged employees to file claims only to then force them to hand the land back over to them afterwards. And finally, some people would file a claim to get cheap land and then sell it on to others for profit, completely undermining what the government had originally intended the act to be used for. When it also became clear that 160 acres of land was not actually sufficient to support a family anyway, the US government passed the Timber Culture Act in 1873. This act granted homesteaders an additional 160 acres of free land if they agreed to plant trees on 40 acres of this. Solutions for a lack of water in the Great Plains, amongst other things, would eventually be found by homesteaders, making a move west more attractive for many, but the Homestead Act certainly helped encourage this movement initially. Now, just as the means by which the main character in this game got access to this land isn't the same as the Homestead Act, the sheer scale on what's being built here isn't the same, but there is a better representation within the game of what Homestead would have looked like, so we're going to have a look at that now. Now, as you can see, the scale here is much smaller, the building is much simpler, but this still would have been a good version of a homestead. I mean, if you see some of the photos of what some of the pioneers and early homesteaders built, they didn't look as stable and as comfortable as this does, but this still gives us something of a virtual understanding and representation, at least, of what a homestead may have looked like, with a small family being supported by an individual farm.
And I think that's everything.